Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. I've been babysitting since I was 16, but nothing prepared me for what happened that cold November night. The Thompsons were a quiet, well-mannered couple, the kind you see in home improvement commercials, all smiles and matching sweaters. They lived in a nice house on the edge of town, surrounded by tall, skeletal trees that shivered in the wind. I'd babysat for them a few times before, and it had always been easy. Their 6-month-old daughter, Lily, was an angel, one of those rare babies that actually slept through the night. So, when they asked me to watch her while they went out for dinner, I didn't hesitate. "She's already asleep," Mrs. Thompson had said as she slipped on her coat. "If she wakes up, just check the monitor." No problem. Easy money. They left, and I settled onto the couch with a blanket, the baby monitor propped up on the coffee table. It was one of those high-tech ones with a video feed, a tiny green-lit screen that showed Lily's crib from a camera mounted in the corner of her room. She was curled up like a little bean, breathing softly, her tiny hands twitching as she dreamed. An hour passed, then another. The house was silent except for the occasional groan of the old wooden floors shifting in the cold. Then, at exactly 10:30 p.m., the baby monitor crackled. Static. I sat up, suddenly alert. Then came a sound, soft, almost musical. A voice. A whisper. At first, I thought it was Lily babbling in her sleep, but when I glanced at the monitor, my stomach dropped. Lily was still. Her tiny chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. She hadn't moved at all, but someone else had. A figure stood over her crib. Tall, thin. Its shape was wrong, like something that had been stretched too far. My breath hitched in my throat. It was leaning over Lily, whispering something. Words I couldn't understand. A language that scraped against my skull like nails on a chalkboard. The rational part of my brain screamed go, but my body wouldn't move. I was frozen, my fingers gripping the blanket, so tightly my knuckles turned white. Then, as if it sensed me watching, the figure slowly turned its head and looked straight into the camera. My paralysis shattered. I bolted upstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time, heart hammering so hard I thought my ribs might crack. The hallway was dark, the air heavy with something foul, something rotten. I flung the nursery door open. Empty. No shadow. No figure. Just Lily, sleeping peacefully. But the air in the room was wrong. Too cold, like the inside of a meat locker. My breath fogged as I stepped inside, my pulse a wild drumbeat in my ears. I checked the closet, under the crib, even behind the curtains. Nothing. My hands were shaking as I picked up Lily. She felt warm, solid, real, but my gut told me something was off. That's when I glanced at the monitor still clutched in my hand. The screen was frozen. The image was still there. The shadowy figure, hunched over the crib, staring at the camera. My vision blurred with fear. I grabbed Lily's blanket and rushed downstairs, out the front door, into the freezing night. I didn't stop until I was standing at the end of the driveway, heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I don't remember how long I stood there, holding Lily against my chest, whispering mindless reassurances to myself. But eventually, The Thompsons' car pulled up. Mrs. Thompson got out first, her face painted with confusion. "Arya, what are you doing out here?" I tried to explain. The shadow, the whispering, the monitor. My voice shook, the words tumbling out in a frantic mess. Mr. Thompson took Lily from my arms, frowning. "The monitor must have glitched," he said. "No," I whispered. "It wasn't a glitch." Mrs. Thompson's face softened. "You must have imagined it. Maybe a trick of the light." I didn't argue. I didn't have the strength. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt it again. That wrongness. I handed them the monitor and left without another word. But that wasn't the end. A few hours later, I woke up to my phone vibrating. A text from Mrs. Thompson. "Call me. Now." I sat up, my body suddenly ice cold. Then, another message came through. It was there. We saw it. I dialed instantly, my fingers stiff. She answered on the first ring, her voice shaking. "We checked the footage, Arya. The thing you saw. It appeared 10 minutes before you got here." My heart nearly stopped. "Lily was alone," she whispered, "but it was already in the room." The line went dead. I never babysat for them again. I never babysat for anyone again. Story 2. Babysitting was never something I particularly loved, but it was easy money, and I needed it. The Connors were new in town, just moved into an old Victorian house at the end of a long, narrow street. The kind of house with a front porch that sagged a little, shutters that creaked in the wind, and a history that people in town only spoke about in hushed voices. They had one daughter, Emma, 5 years old, small for her age, with big brown eyes that seemed too knowing for a kid who hadn't even started school yet. She was a quiet child, polite, but something about her felt off, like she was waiting for something. When I arrived that evening, Mrs. Connor gave me a quick rundown. Emma was already fed, just needed to be in bed by 8. "She has nightmares sometimes," she said, pulling on her coat. "If she wakes up scared, just sit with her for a few minutes." No problem. I'd done this 100 times before. By 8 o'clock, Emma was tucked under her pink comforter, her stuffed bunny clutched against her chest. I left her night light on, one of those old ones that glowed an eerie yellow instead of white. It buzzed faintly, like a dying firefly trapped in glass. I went downstairs, flipped on the TV, and settled into the couch. The house made noise, like old houses do, wood shifting, pipes clicking, nothing unusual, until I heard the soft patter of feet on the stairs. Emma stood at the bottom, her bunny dangling from one hand, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "She's watching me," she whispered. Something in her voice made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I muted the TV. "Who's watching you, sweetie?" "The girl in my window." My mouth went dry. "What girl?" She pointed up toward her room, and I swallowed hard. My brain scrambled for logic. Maybe she saw her own reflection, maybe a tree's shadow. But Emma's room was on the second floor. I forced a smile. "Come on, let's check it out." Her little hand felt like ice as she gripped mine, leading me up the stairs. The hallway was dim, the night light from her room spilling a dull glow onto the wooden floor. The door was open just as I'd left it. I hesitated at the threshold, listening. Nothing, just the quiet hum of the house breathing around us. Emma's bed was as I'd left it, her blankets rumpled but undisturbed. I walked to the window, and peered out. Just trees swaying in the breeze, the old street lamp flickering near the curb. See? Nothing there. Emma didn't move. She stood by the bed, staring at the window with an expression too serious for a 5-year-old. I knelt beside her. It was probably a dream, sweetheart. She blinked up at me. She said you'd say that. A chill wrapped around my spine like cold fingers. What? Emma crawled into bed, pulling the covers to her chin. She told me you wouldn't believe me. Something shifted in my gut. I suddenly wanted very badly to be anywhere but in that house. I swallowed. Well, I'm here, so if she comes back, I'll tell her to go away. Okay. Emma just nodded, but I could see she wasn't convinced. I turned to leave, but something caught my eye. A small, wet footprint on the wooden floor near the window. My breath hitched. It wasn't from Emma. Her socks were bone dry. And it wasn't a smudge or a trick of the light. It was fresh, like someone had just stepped inside with damp, bare feet. I locked every door and window in that house and sat awake until the Connors came home. When I told Mrs. Connor what happened, she went pale. She swallowed hard, glancing at her husband. "Did you hear that?" she whispered to him. He nodded slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah." I looked between them. "What? What is it?" Mrs. Connor hesitated, then sighed. "The last family who lived here, they had a little girl. She was Emma's age." I waited, my stomach knotting. "She fell from that window," she said quietly. "They never figured out how it happened. The room felt colder. They say," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "that sometimes, late at night, people still see her there, standing in the window, watching." I didn't take another babysitting job after that. Story 3. I never liked dolls. Never. Something about them always felt off. Maybe it was the way their glass eyes reflected the light, or how their frozen little smiles seemed too knowing, too secretive. But this job paid well, and the Callahans were nice people. Rich, old-fashioned, but nice. They lived in one of those big, creaky Victorian houses that looked straight out of a ghost story. High ceilings, dark wood floors, and too many rooms. And they had dolls. Hundreds of them. I was babysitting their 2-year-old son, Milo. A sweet kid, quiet but not shy. When I arrived, his mother gave me the usual rundown. Dinner in the fridge, bedtime at 8, emergency numbers on the counter. Then she smiled and said, "Oh, and don't mind the dolls." I forced a smile back. They were everywhere. On shelves, in cabinets, even perched on top of furniture like tiny sentinels. Porcelain faces, beady glass eyes, dresses in shades of blue, pink, white, faded with age. Some looked pristine. Others had cracks running through their faces like spider webs. I told myself they were just dolls. Harmless. Milo and I spent most of the evening in the living room. I read him a story, gave him his bottle, and rocked him until his eyes fluttered shut. Easy job. At around 8, I carried him to his room and tucked him in. That's when I noticed the doll on the bookshelf. She was different from the others. A porcelain girl in a tattered blue dress, her hair in perfect golden ringlets. Her painted lips were slightly parted, as if she was whispering something too quiet for me to hear. But it was her eyes that made my stomach clench. Most doll eyes are dull, lifeless. This one's were bright. almost wet looking. I didn't remember seeing her there before. I turned off the light, left the door open just a crack, and went back downstairs. Maybe an hour passed before I heard it. Soft, hesitant footsteps on the stairs. I turned, expecting to see Milo, but when I did, he was just standing at the bottom step. His little hands clenched the banister, his lower lip trembling. "She moved," he whispered. For a second, I just stared at him. "What?" He pointed up toward his room. "The doll. She moved." I forced a laugh. "Dolls don't move, buddy." Milo shook his head, eyes wide. She smiled at me. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I wanted to brush it off, tell him he was just dreaming, but he wasn't crying. He wasn't acting like a scared little kid trying to get attention. He was terrified. I swallowed hard. "Let's go see." He clung to my hand as we climbed the stairs together. His room was exactly as I left it. Nightlight glowing, blankets rumpled, nothing out of place. Except the doll. She was still on the shelf, still wearing that tattered blue dress. But her head was tilted. I felt sick. Maybe I had just misremembered the way she was posed before. Maybe. I straightened her head, then turned to Milo with my best reassuring smile. "See? She's just a doll." He didn't look convinced. I got him back into bed, but he wouldn't let go of my hand. "Can you stay?" I hesitated. It wasn't professional to stay in the kids' room all night, but I also didn't want to go back downstairs and sit alone with all those other dolls watching me. So I stayed. I sat in the rocking chair, phone in hand, listening to Milo's breathing slow into sleep. At some point, my eyelids got heavy. I don't know how long I was out before I woke up to the sound of porcelain scraping wood. I sat up fast. The room was dark. The only light came from the night light in the corner. My heart pounded as I looked toward the bookshelf. The doll was gone. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam swept across the room, and that's when I saw her. She was on the floor, sitting upright, facing me. I swallowed hard. Slowly, I reached for my phone and snapped a picture. I don't even know why. Maybe to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining this. I checked the photo immediately. My breath caught in my throat. In the picture, the doll's head was turned completely to the side, her mouth stretched into a wide, unnatural grin. I looked back at the real doll on the floor. Her head was forward again. I grabbed Milo, wrapped him in a blanket, and bolted out of that room. We sat by the front door until his parents got home. I didn't tell them what happened. I just took my money and left. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Mrs. Callahan. "Thank you for babysitting last night. By the way, the doll in the blue dress, we got rid of her years ago.